Noah was an ordinary man who lived in an extraordinarily evil time. We read in Genesis 6:5 and then verses 11 and 12, "Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked on the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth." Roughly 1,500 years after Adam and Eve's initial sin, virtually all of mankind had given themselves over to the lusts of the eyes, the lusts of the flesh, and the pride of life. Satan must have thought that victory was within his grasp. But God's somber perspective is graphically recorded for us in Genesis 6, verses 6 and 7. It says, "And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. And the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things and to birds of the sky, for I am sorry that I have made them." Man's sin was so prevalent and despicable that God determined to utterly destroy the world along with man, whom he had so lovingly created in his own image. But thankfully, in the midst of this very dim situation, God found one ordinary, righteous man. Noah was a righteous man. Blameless in his time, Noah walked with God, and he found favor, or found grace, in the eyes of the Lord. Genesis 6, verses 8 and 9. So in the midst of this crooked and perverse generation, Noah stood alone as a beacon of light in a dark world of sin and deprivation. Now we're familiar with the story. Noah was instructed to build an ark according to God's specific instructions. Then he was instructed to take his wife, their 3 sons, and their wives, along with a pair of the animals, male and female, of those that were unclean, and were to take 7 of those who were clean into the ark along with their food. And there they would be saved from the flood of God's wrath. God then opened the fountains of the deep and the floodgates of the sky for 40 days and 40 nights, and the water covered everything that prevailed for 150 days. Genesis 7 and verse 23 says, "Thus he blotted out every living thing that was upon the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things and to birds of the sky, and they were blotted out from the earth, and only Noah was left, together with those that were with him in the ark." Now Noah made many difficult and lonely choices. He chose to serve God when everyone else on the face of the earth was wholly given over to wickedness. And like Joshua, we can imagine him shouting, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." But can you imagine the ridicule from family and friends and neighbors as he was building this ark? He must have been a laughingstock to all of those around him, building that huge boat on dry land for no apparent purpose. And he did this for almost 100 years. But during this time, he also chose to preach, to warn others about impending doom, and to try to convince them to be saved. Hebrews 11 and verse 7 says that by faith, Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. So it was through obedient faith that Noah saved himself and his household. It had never rained on the earth up to this point, but Noah believed God's proclamation about the flood. He didn't just condemn the world through his preaching and ark building, he also chose to stand apart from his own family. For in Genesis 5 and verse 30 we read that Noah's father Lamech had other sons and daughters. Yet apparently none of Noah's brothers or sisters listened to his preaching, and they all perished in the flood. But here we see an ordinary man who was willing to do an extraordinary thing, who was willing to separate himself from every other family of the earth, who was willing to proclaim that a flood was coming and that all who did not heed the voice of God would be destroyed. God was glorified by the faithfulness of Noah. And we can follow that same example today, that example of faithful service to God, even in the face of great evil. Friends, we thank you for joining us for our program today, and have a blessed day.